is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello and welcome to Global Business Europe, live from CGTN in London. I'm Jamie Owen.
And I'm Juliet Mann. Our top stories. Humans are to blame. The stark message from the United Nations' most comprehensive report on climate change, with a warning it could get worse.
Our other headlines: international help arrives in Greece as thousands more people are forced to flee the wildfires.
Britain imposes more sanctions on Belarus as President Lukashenko denies involvement in the death of a dissident.
And as Japan bids farewell to Olympics 2020, it's Beijing next, and the Winter Games just 6 months away. A wake-up call for the world. That's how the United Nations has described its devastating landmark review into climate change. The report says human activity is indisputably responsible for global warming. The world's largest ever study warns temperatures could cross a crucial threshold by as early as the year 2030, and some changes are already irreversible.
The study finds global surface temperature has risen by almost 1.1 degrees Celsius in the last decade compared to the 19th century. Now, scientists behind the report say it's a statement of fact that human activity has warmed the climate, in particular from the burning of fossil fuels. Now, even with current emissions targets on track, it's a matter of when, not if, temperatures rise 1.5 degrees Celsius, the danger level agreed in the 2015 Paris climate deal. The last 5 years have been the hottest on record since 1850, and that key marker is set to be breached by 2040. Now, sea levels have risen at a rapid pace over the last 50 years, and recent rises have nearly tripled compared with the period between 1901 and 1971. Now, this is being driven by the melting of ice sheets in the polar regions and ocean warming, with levels set to remain elevated for hundreds of thousands of years. Now, the report says the world has already seen extreme weather conditions linked to climate change, and the intensity and frequency of floods, heat waves and drought will increase if emission levels stay as they are. Scientists, however, do believe that a catastrophe can be avoided and are calling on governments to take immediate action.
Well, let's talk now to our correspondent, Tony Waterman, watching events for us in Brussels. Tony, some bleak and sobering findings in this landmark report.
Certainly, Jamie, bleak, shocking, a bit somber, and in the words of the famous Swedish environmental activist Greta Thunberg, not surprising. This is a review of scientific studies which are already out there floating around the public, 14,000 of them to be exact. But the big takeaway that we're getting from this study is that climate change and its harrowing effects seem to be on the verge of spiraling out of control. The global temperature is rising. It's already up 1.1 degrees Celsius. And that these scientists are saying that unless there is this immediate, rapid, and large-scale reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, then that critical 1.5 degrees Celsius threshold is going to be beyond reach, is what they said in this report. And that regardless what the best-case scenario is, that line is going to be crossed in the coming decades here. But for this massive reduction in greenhouse gases to take place, this is going to require governments, businesses, ordinary citizens to become very aggressive when it comes to accelerating the shift from fossil fuels to renewable energy, and to be able to capture the CO2, which is already floating around in our atmosphere. This report says that the concentration is at its highest level in at least 2 million years. That is going to require the mass restoration and expansion of our forests, which are great ways to suck in CO2 and also other harmful emissions floating around in the air. These are unprecedented changes that are taking place. In some cases, the study says that they are irreversible, particularly when it comes to our ocean. in our ice sheet. Scientists saying that the changes that are already underway are going to continue for thousands of years because there is this heat that is trapped very deep in our oceans, which is going to take a long time to dissipate. In the meantime, it's going to be whipping up these storms and also continuing to melt the ice sheets. And for the first time, these scientists saying that the people to blame, well, that's us, humans. Take a listen.
It is indisputable that human activities are causing climate change and making extreme weather events more frequent and severe. Second, it shows that climate change is affecting every region on our planet. And lastly, it explains that strong, rapid, sustained reductions in carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gas emissions would be required to limit global warming.
Tony, the United Nations is calling on national governments to act immediately. How have world leaders responded?
Well, as you would imagine, Jamie, most of them calling for immediate and very aggressive action. The UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson saying that he hoped this would be a wake-up call for the world, saying that it's time for coal to be relegated to the world's history books. The U.S.'s special envoy for climate change, John Kerry, saying that all developed nations need to make aggressive commitments when it comes to climate change. On the other side of that, we heard from Mohammed Nasheed. He is the former head of the Maldives, one of the countries that is expected to suffer the most from climate change and rising sea levels. He says that his countrymen and women are the ones dying because of other people's carbon emissions and called for much tougher action. It is really going to be November when the rhetoric is going to hit the road. That is when global leaders are going to be meeting in Glasgow, Scotland for the COP26 climate discussions. They are coming under increasing pressure to show up to those talks, not only with more aggressive climate goals, but also very clear strategies when it comes to how they are going to reach those goals. It is really just the European Union at this point which has laid out any sort of roadmap, any legislative roadmap that is, and that is still going to take years of negotiation before it can come into force, and probably a lot of changes are going to take place. So they are coming under increasing pressure to really show that this is not rhetoric, that they are going to take the serious steps required to really stabilize the global temperature, because if they don't take action, it's going to cost a lot more in the end.
Tony Waterman in Brussels, thank you very much.
Well, Maxfield Weiss is Executive Director at CGTN Europe, a charity that helps companies and governments manage climate risks.
When it comes down to it, this is our final wake-up call. We need urgent system-wide action, and it must happen now if we are to have any chance of limiting warming to 1.5 degrees. I think the other important thing that the report notes is that unequivocally that these catastrophic causes of climate change are human-induced.
You mentioned that you think they're human-induced. I mean, this summer in particular seems to be marked by extreme weather, floods, wildfires, heat waves. So what is driving it? Is it all about humans?
Exactly that. I think the report findings, they're not surprising, right? We're all seeing these impacts of climate change, as you mentioned, from Finland to Turkey, these extreme weather that's proliferating Europe. And just last week, we saw these apocalyptic scenes coming out of Athens with fire-induced clouds and ground temperatures that are reaching nearly 55 degrees. And this is also being capitulated with catastrophic flooding that we recently saw in Germany. And this is not just happening in Europe, but globally, with devastating floods in China and heat waves that are coming across North America and Siberia. And they're all being caused by these human-induced climate change impacts.
You say urgent actions needed. Many countries are making bold statements and setting ambitious targets for net zero. But is anyone really doing enough to get there?
So we're already at 1.1 degree of warming so far. So the climate, it's already changed. It's happening. But what is clear is that government commitments to reduce emissions, they're not going nearly enough as ambitious as needed. So with these current commitments for governments, we'd be reaching about 2.9 to 3.4 degree warming. And this is quite frightening given the prospects that we're seeing on the ground today. And what is even more concerning is some of these impacts, they're already baked in. So really what we need is businesses and financial institutions, they must act faster. We're seeing momentum on this net zero front in terms of pledges, But we need targets that are backed by interim science-based targets that are in line with 1.5 degrees. And currently, the targets that are coming out of corporates in Europe, they're only going to put Europe on its economy on a 2.7 degree pathway. So we need the business community and governments to step up and act urgently.
You're putting an emphasis there on what businesses need to do to think greener, to be greener. What about governments, though? And I'm thinking in particular the role of China.
So, of course, the role that China has to play is absolutely vital. It's the world's biggest emitter, so the decarbonization of the economy is fundamental. But really what we need is that businesses and governments alike, they're setting clear interim targets to meet net zero that are science-based. And we also need governments and investors as well, and businesses. They must ensure that climate change isn't dealt with in isolation, right? Environmental issues, they're interrelated, so climate must be tackled in tandem with protecting the planet's natural capital. So it's water, it's forest, it's biodiversity. The planet does not know these differences, and science has long told us that climate change poses this urgent threat, and it's being come across in the IPCC reports over the years. But with these impacts being felt at our doorsteps, we cannot perceive global warming as a distant reality or something that future generations must manage. It's getting ready to bust through the door, as they say, and in fact, I think it's already kicked the door wide open.
Well, this United Nations report lands during a summer of extreme weather events, from that flooding in Germany, China and India to ferocious wildfires in southern Europe and the United States. Horror story, biblical, apocalyptic, just some of the words used to describe the fires which have swept Greece in the worst heatwave for 30 years. Our correspondent Evangelo Sipsas is in Athens for us. Evangelo, what's the latest on the island of Evia and across the rest of Greece?
Well, as we speak at the moment, firefighters, residents, and volunteers are battling with the wildfires in the northern part of the island of Evia, trying to save whatever they can. One village after the other is pretty much losing the battle with the fires, with most of the houses they're being ravaged by the flames. Just a reminder that this fire that has been burning across the northern part of island of Evia started on August 3rd and has been the most devastating fire out of dozens that have been burning through the country, in the farmlands of the country. And all this was started actually last week, when the country was going through an extreme heat wave with temperatures reaching close to 47 degrees Celsius. Now, there have been other fires as well burning through the country, with one in northern Greece out of the town of Grevena, in central Greece, in the Peloponnese, near the site of the original Olympic Games, ancient Olympia, and here where I'm currently at in northern Athens, outside of the Greek capital. We're currently, as you can see behind me, there's no active fire and things have been under control. There has been an extreme call from support from abroad since the firefighter and the Greek firefighters have reached their limits. They called for support from other European countries and Middle Eastern, which listened to that call and sent a number of planes, helicopters, and manpower to support the Greek firefighters.
And we know that thousands of people have been forced to leave their homes. What's being done to help people who've lost their homes, lost everything? Where are they staying?
Well, as we already know, the destruction is imminent. There's been a number of towns that have been destroyed, with all these people having to be evacuated from the area. And these apocalyptic scenes that we all seen that are making on social media or other broadcasters and on CGTN as well, we see that a number of people had to flee by ferries from the beach across from the island of Evia to the mainland of Greece. Now, all these people are currently staying in specialized centers set up from the Greek government, which allow them to be sheltered in there to sleep at night, provide them food, it provides them water and clothes and the basic necessities that they need. The Greek government also has set up a hotline for people that are in need for their houses that have been destroyed or not livable to call in and to find some support, whether that is a financial support or some shelter. Jamie, I don't know if you can hear right now, but there's been helicopters going overhead, and that is just an understanding of what the Greek government is doing here in the Greek capital to contain any resurgence of fire, just to make sure that there won't be any new fires that are breaking out.
Summer 2021 was supposed to have been the year that Greece recovered from the losses of the pandemic and last year's cancelled summer holidays. This couldn't have been further from what Greece needed, and in particular the tourist industry needed, as these images, as you say, have been broadcast around the world.
Yes, the Greek tourism started very strong in comparison with last year. There was an increase of 130% of incoming flights and tourists. Just in the first 2 months, Greece reached about 3 million tourists, which was an incredible increase from last year. But with the scenes, the destructions and villages being burned down, people are avoiding to come because they're fearing that something similar might happen to them. And just to point out that not only villages have been evacuated, but also holiday spots, holidaymakers resorts. In Achaia, an area southern Greece, outside of the town of Labidi and Zyria, 2 holiday resorts were completely burned down, and all these tourists had to be taken to refuge. Same in Evia, where it's mostly domestic but also international tourists that were on the island at the moment when the fire broke out. They had to get on one of those ferries that we all saw so they can go to those specialized centers so they can be sheltered.
Evangelos Sipsas in Athens, thank you very much.
Quick reminder for you that CGTN is available to watch for free on all the major digital platforms, on Smart TV or online, on Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV. We're on YouTube and Dailymotion at CGTN.com and the CGTN app. You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, the bidding war over one of Britain's biggest supermarkets. Morrison's is just one company in the middle of takeover frenzy.
Search CGTN Europe wherever you get your podcasts to subscribe to The Agenda podcast. The Agenda with me, Stephen Cole, always gets to the heart of the story. Just subscribe today and listen now.
Covering the world from 4 continents. A new horizon. Teams in Beijing, Washington, D.C., Nairobi, and London. Who connect, interact, and inquire to bring you the stories that matter to all. The Link, only on CGTN. Facing the unknown is always difficult. In a world in turmoil, it's easy to lose orientation. But when the storms come, we have to see the possibilities. Reinvent. Find new opportunities. Discover a path forward. CGTN. See the difference.
The world has changed under the pressure of the pandemic. For many of us, life is returning to some kind of normal. As we're adapting to changes in all of our lives, let Global Business Europe be your guide to the new normal. Join us weekdays on CGTN.
welcome back to Global Business Europe. The UK has slapped Belarus with new economic sanctions over its human rights record. Britain's measures are the latest in a line of Western sanctions and will target the country's state-owned banks. Meanwhile, Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko has accused the opposition of plotting a coup in the run-up to last year's presidential election.
Lukashenko made his comments at a news conference, his first appearance since the death of a prominent activist and the refusal of a Belarus athlete to return home early from the Olympics. The opposition has accused Lukashenko of rigging last year's election to extend his rule, something that he's denied.
We then carried out preparations for the elections on the conditions of total transparency and democratization of political life. The only difference was that some were preparing for just and fair elections, while others were calling for smashing the government.
Well, let's speak to our correspondent Stuart Smith, who's in Moscow for us. Hi there, Stuart. Now, so far, sanctions against Belarus haven't meant a change of course. So what, if any, impact will these new sanctions have?
Well, it seems not to, and that's something Lukashenko himself, the president of Belarus, repeated again today, that these sanctions are not going to change anything. And yet, throughout the now 8.5-hour press conference with a variety of journalists, citizens and academics, he did let slip that there have been moves to try and get around sanctions. So it is affecting things to an extent in Belarus. For example, now certain oil products have to be exported through Russia and then moved on from Russia to avoid sanctions. And Belarus has been looking for new markets outside Russia, post-Soviet states and the United States. But the UK says that this will make a difference, that they're targeted sanctions with the intention of building up pressure on Lukashenko, those that surround Lukashenko and have his ear, and also the state-owned industries, such as you mentioned, banking, but also trade and aviation. The Foreign Office of the UK says that products of Belarus state-owned industries will not be sold in the UK, and that aerospace companies will not touch his fleet of luxury aircraft. And that comes at the same day as the United States and Canada also impose restrictions to mark this 1 year since those protests in Belarus.
You talk about 1 year since those protests in Belarus. There's a lot of people who have been campaigning against him. He's denied, though, President Lukashenko has denied targeting those activists. What did he have to say?
Well, within the country, he's very clear that he considers those that are protesting criminals. He calls them fascists, nationalists and other things as well that I wouldn't want to repeat here. And he talks about those people as people that are traitors to Belarus. 600 of those activists are in prison. Thousands have had to flee the country, including Shishov, the dissident who fled to Ukraine, set up an organization in Ukraine designed to help people leave Belarus and find safety in Poland, Lithuania and Ukraine. He was found dead last week, hanged. The Ukrainian police are investigating it as a murder disguised as a hanging. Lukashenko says nothing to do with us. The FBK don't do this. The Secret Service don't do this. Similarly, we've heard from this sprinter in Tokyo who was forced back, in her words, due to FBK pressure. Again, Lukashenko says we don't do this, and that she has herself brought this upon herself because she's been working with Western powers, with dissidents in Poland to try and set this up. In effect, it was all rigged, and that her complaints were just excuses to try and flee Japan. So he doesn't believe any of this and puts the blame to other opposition leaders corrupting Belarusian citizens, and does consistently blame Western powers for interfering in Belarus's situation.
Stuart Smith in Moscow, thank you for the update.
China's factory gate prices rose in July, driven by higher crude oil and coal prices. The producer price index rose 9% from a year earlier, faster than the year-on-year growth of 8.8% in June. Farm produce also saw improved growth. The consumer price index rose 1% in July on the previous year.
Second quarter earnings in Germany's BioNTech surged to $3.3 billion on the success of the COVID vaccine developed with Pfizer. Shares rose on the stronger than expected results. The company says they had shipped around 1 billion doses of their COVID-19 vaccine by July.
Net profits for Saudi Arabia's state oil producer Aramco have almost quadrupled from the same period last year, bringing in $25.5 billion in the second quarter. Aramco says the easing of COVID restrictions, vaccinations and the return of economic activity have all boosted demand. The world's biggest oil producer joins Exxon and Royal Dutch Shell, which have also reported strong results.
Deliveroo shares have surged by over 10% after Germany's delivery hero purchased a 5% stake. Shares in the firm hit just under $5 a share, their highest level since floating on the London stock market in April. The delivery hero operates in 50 countries around the world, but it lacks a major presence in the UK, which is Deliveroo's main market. A judge is hearing closing arguments in the controversial bankruptcy of Purdue Pharma. Part of the plan would give legal immunity to the company's owners, something which has come under heavy criticism. The US pharmaceutical giant has admitted misleading doctors about the addictive nature of its drugs, OxyContin, and contributing to a nationwide opioid addiction crisis that's killed nearly 500,000 people over 20 years. Well, our correspondent John Terrett is in New York. Good to see you, John. Look, talk to us through the background to this bankruptcy.
Yes, and you don't rush me on this one, folks, because this is a very, very subtle story, and I'm glad you're doing it today because it is a unique American story. It is extraordinary what has happened here over the last 25 years, and I think one day there will be a major Hollywood movie about it. Not yet, but one day surely there will, because what happened was about 25 or 30 years ago, there was a change in rules here regarding the ability of doctors to prescribe to their patients for pain management highly addictive opioid drugs. Now, up until that point, 1994, 96, something like that, doctors could only give these opioid drugs to cancer patients. So if you had cancer, then you were okay for your pain management with an opioid drug. But if you went in and presented with a sore neck or a sore leg or something like that, then the doctors were not allowed to give you these opioids. Well, that changed, as I say, 25, 30 years ago. The drug we're talking about today is OxyContin, which is made by Purdue Pharmaceutical. It came to the market in 1996, and Purdue is based in Connecticut to the north of New York City. Now, it was not just Purdue, it was lots of these drug companies suddenly able to push out these opioid drugs to doctors. They were marketing them heavily. The unforeseen consequences of this, and nobody, I think, saw this coming, is that we ran into a nationwide opioid crisis that ended up killing, as you said, 500,000 Americans over this last 20 years. Now, I will just point out to you that we've lost 617,000 Americans to COVID-19 in the last 18 months, 2 years or so. So you can see that over a much wider time frame, the crisis is very similar to the one that we're seeing today. How did it happen? Well, what do you do when you go to the doctors? You go and you present and you say, I've got a pain in my leg, and he gives you, let's say, an opioid drug. Well, you take that drug until Wednesday, you suddenly feel better, and you put the rest of the drugs in the medicine cabinet just in case. And what happened? Mostly teenagers, not all teenagers, but mostly teenagers, you know what they're like, they're always pushing the envelope, came along and they found these highly addictive drugs in grandma's medicine cabinet in the bathroom, or auntie and uncle, or maybe mum and dad as well, and they tried them. And some people are not affected by them, but many, many, many people get instantly addicted. And we ended up with towns and cities all across this country being flooded by these highly addictive opioids. And unfortunately, we saw them being sold, these pills, $70 a pill on the street. And of course, for teenagers to buy that, they had to turn to petty crime, stealing, and that sort of thing. Now, unfortunately, at exactly the same time that this was going on, cheap heroin was being imported, and it still is, into the United States, across the southern border. Yes, we know that. Also directly into our airports in places like JFK here in New York and Boston and Chicago. And cheap heroin sells for $3 a bag. Now, when you've had enough of your OxyContin, the only place to go is to heroin. So you see $70 a pill on the streets in towns and cities, $3 a bag for heroin. You can see what happened. And this is where the overdoses really came in, because heroin is a particularly nasty drug. Now, Purdue Pharma, in this bankruptcy case going on now, has admitted that, yes, it was liable in misleading doctors and their managers in the hospital systems all over the country, not quite telling them the truth of the addictive nature of OxyContin. But the family that runs the company, the Sackler family, will in all likelihood not really be punished in any way to many people's satisfaction. And that's the story of the day here at the moment.
And what a story. John Terrett, thank you very much.
Now, there have been record levels of takeover activity and bidding wars for two high-profile British companies. Battles are underway for UK drug maker Vectura and Britain's fourth largest supermarket chain, Morrison's. Alpesh Patel is an investment analyst and founder of the private equity house Pryfinium Partners. Alpesh, good to see you. This battle for a British maker of inhalers has intensified. The world's biggest cigarette maker, Philip Morris International, has increased its takeover offer for Vectura after the private equity company Carlyle raised its offer. Why is Vectura such a big prize?
Well, one of the things which caught my eye was that it's going to be making inhaler treatments for COVID-19, but that's not the only reason. Philip Morris have said they want to get out of selling cigarettes within the next 10 years or so, so they need to start making these acquisitions. Perhaps one other reason it's an important acquisition for them is Vectura's at its 2006 price level, so arguably it's pretty undervalued. Its highs are still 50% above where it is at the moment, so there's a lot of potential to the upside. 180 pence is what I would want to see for this bid to be win-win. You know, it leaves a bit of room for some more upside for the bidder and still gives a good return to the shareholders. So I think there's a bit more to go here. The other complication with this is Vectura's ethical shareholders who won't want to be shareholders in a tobacco maker, they'll have to dump stock. So that's an added complication with this one.
Well, you bring us right on to my next question. The Philip Morris offer is very controversial. The cigarette maker trying to buy a company that treats respiratory problems. I mean, some investors really do care about this, don't they?
Yes, absolutely. It moves Philip Morris more into an ethical space. It moves them more into their future. It moves them more in line with what there's a global focus on, which is most definitely away from tobacco, more towards health. And when you think about all those social issues. So there's a lot of reasons why this fits in well with Philip Morris, but that price point, if I was a Vectura shareholder, I'd be thinking, no, I need a bit more out of this.
Let's talk about supermarkets. It's been reported one of the companies chasing Morrison's, CD&R, is considering a counterbid after Fortress increased its offer. Has this bidding war got further to run?
Oh, most definitely. Morrison's, they 328 pence roughly is their all-time high. These offers around 270p are well short of that. I'd say about 300 is what I'd like to see as a shareholder in Morrison's. And I used to be a shareholder in Morrison's, and I've been following this company for over 20 years, and I think there's a lot more potential here. So the takeover panel in the UK has given a bit more time to the American bidder to improve that offer, come back for more. I think there is a bit more to be squeezed out here out of this. And like I say, I'm expecting at least I'm thinking about another 10% uplift on what the best offer is at the moment on the table. I was just so surprised that Morrison's board had agreed to the initial offer, which was even lower than this. They just seemed so desperate to accept the offer straight away without even saying, well, hang on, let's open it up to the broader market. They just seem to have pulled the trigger too quick, I think. And I'd be very disappointed if I was a shareholder with the board right now, how quick they were to agree to the very first offer that they've got.
Alpesh, good to see you. Thanks for coming on the show. Alpesh Patel there for us in London.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, coffee and a croissant at a cafe, only with a COVID-19 health pass. France introduces new rules to encourage vaccination.
The EU's digital COVID certificate, which offers the promise of unlocking hassle-free travel around Europe this summer.
In less than 2 weeks' time, the Czech border will also open to all EU and Serbian citizens. 4.4 million Hungarians received their first dose of COVID vaccine.
18 and over can receive a COVID-19 vaccination, but it does come with conditions.
Third wave will probably take longer to emerge. This vaccination centre is part of a massive effort to try and drive down the numbers of the new variant that was first identified in India.
On the agenda with me, Stephen Cole, we look up into space. We look down into data. We look at debt. We look at politics. We look at opioids, climate change. We look at all the issues that really matter around the world. But you matter too. We want to tell the stories you want to see and hear about. Make it your agenda.
Roger, make you loud and clear.
We can try out the wild and crazy ideas.
Nothing can stop an idea whose time is coming. This idea is coming.
I actually feel quite comfortable in isolation.
We should all be very basic when we try to save the world.
Awesome!
We hope it will happen. We have to live in hope.
The agreement is signed. But what is the real deal now UK has left the EU? For trade, for business, for the city, for ordinary people. Make sense of Brexit with CGTN.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe with Jamie Owen and me, Juliet Mann. Our top stories. Humans are to blame. The stark message from the United Nations' most comprehensive report on climate change, which says some changes are already irreversible. And international help arrives in Greece as thousands more people are forced to flee wildfires burning out of control.
Well, let's give you more now on our top story, that United Nations landmark report warning intermediate, immediate and hard-hitting action is necessary to avoid a climate catastrophe. Extreme weather is one major effect of climate change, and the report says that many of the world's most important agricultural countries are likely to see more droughts or extreme rain, including Argentina. Well, our reporter, Joel Richards, is in the capital, Buenos Aires. Joel, good to see you. Tell us more about the extreme weather hitting Argentina and the effect that it's having there.
Jamie, well, good afternoon. Well, just last week we travelled to the city of Rosario, just a few hours north of Buenos Aires, which sits on the banks of the River Paraná, which really gives us an opportunity to just to look at one example of how this increasingly extreme examples of weather across the region is hitting South America and hitting Argentina. The River Paraná is one of the largest rivers in South America. It stretches from Brazil through Paraguay and Argentina. But it's because of the lack of rain, the prolonged lack of rain in Brazil, that the river is now at its lowest level in living memory. We haven't seen these levels since 1944. And what we saw last week in Rosario and surrounding the city are the effects really across the board. Obviously, the ecosystem is being affected. There are tributaries which have completely dried up. We saw how communities are affected. We visited one local school that relied on the waterway to get provisions to the school. That waterway is completely gone. And we also saw the effects on the national economy. The Rosario is one of the largest ports in the world. It's vital for exports of agricultural produce from the three countries that the river runs through. But we're seeing now ships are having to reduce their cargo just in order to navigate the shallow water. So the effects are catastrophic, and Argentina's National Institute of Water has forecasts three possible scenarios. All three of those, for the coming months, expect the situation to get even worse.
People are protesting, though, aren't they? They're urging their governments to change. We've been seeing a lot more environmental activism against climate change.
That's it. As we're seeing really around the world, but with the increasing frequency of events like this, then so too is, as you mentioned, we're seeing increasing activism across society. Argentina is a country with huge natural resources, and there is, as many governments have explained, the current government and previous governments have sought to argue they need to exploit those resources, but they are facing increased resistance. In Rosario, we spoke with activists who formed just last year as a result of some of the forest fires there, and they're lobbying Congress for a new law. There's also a very young generation of activists that are organised under the banner of the Youth for Climate, very much taking the lead of Greta Thunberg, the Swedish activist, and they too are looking to lobby Congress, looking for policy change. We mentioned the economy. COVID-19 affected Argentina greatly, and it was a country that was already in recession, so the government is perhaps looking to exploit its agricultural potential, so to the mining and oil exploration. But this is facing, as I said, increasing resistance, and the report from the United Nations, from the IPCC that we saw today, only underlines the urgency in which governments must act, but also we're seeing how civil society and organisations are increasingly pushing for that policy change.
Jill Richards in Buenos Aires, thank you very much.
Scientists have long warned about the dangers of the Atlantic current, the Gulf Stream, collapsing. Well, now researchers say currents are at their slowest point in at least 1,600 years. If they shut down completely, the implications for the world will be catastrophic. Shini Samara reports.
The climate of planet Earth is an extraordinarily complex system of interconnected forces. The sun is the main driver of this, and its intensity affects global winds, precipitation patterns, and ocean circulation. Massive ocean currents such as the Gulf Stream move heat from one part of the planet to the other. Climate change is already having a visible effect on the world, and scientists are starting to build a clearer picture of what happens when certain climate components near their tipping point. Dr. Levka Caesar is part of an international team from the UK, Ireland and Germany that are looking at one of the largest ocean currents, known as the AMOC.
AMOC, or short AMOC, is the Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation. Surface flow, or a near surface flow, of warm and saline water masses that go from the low latitudes towards the North Atlantic, and there these water masses sink, and we have a colder return flow at depth.
How influential is it globally?
The AMOC is basically the bridge between the two hemispheres, because it's actually transporting heat from the southern towards the northern hemisphere. This energy is released to the atmosphere, and that is how the AMOC influences our climate. We looked at data that can go back over 1,000 years, even nearly 2,000 years. The overall picture is that over the last decades, the AMOC has been in a very weak state.
What do you think is driving this change?
Under global warming, we have a lot of freshwater flux into the subpolar North Atlantic because of the melting of the Arctic sea ice and the Greenland ice sheet. And we also have this warming of the surface waters, and both fresher water, that is less saline, and warmer water is less dense. And this inhibits then the sinking of water masses in the North Atlantic, which is basically one of the drivers of the AMOC.
Does the research reveal anything that we should be concerned about?
The AMOC has been stable for a very, very long time. We know if it gets weaker, this could enhance the sea level rise at US East Coast cities like New York or Boston. A weaker AMOC is linked to enhanced storminess over the North Atlantic, so this could worsen winter storms for northwestern Europe. If we stop global warming now, the AMOC will likely recover. But once the AMOC has reached or gone beyond its tipping point, then even if we reverse the forcing, it will continue to weaken. But the problem is we don't know when exactly it will happen, and once we cross this tipping point, there is no going back for a very, very long time. I guess sometimes, when you know more about a system, you also realize how much there is that you still don't know. And it is hopeful in the sense that we do know about it now, and right now is a time where we can still act. So that is hopeful. But the other thing, I guess, would be looking at, okay, how is climate politics done right now? And that, at the moment, still doesn't look extremely hopeful to me because we're not acting fast enough.
Dr. Levka Caesar talking to Reza's Shini Samara, and you can see Reza every Sunday at 16:30 GMT on CGTN.
People in France must now prevent a COVID health pass to enter restaurants and bars, access non-emergency hospital treatment or travel across the country.
It's part of the government's plan to encourage more vaccinations and slow down infections. Our correspondent Ross Cullen is in Paris. Ross, how does this COVID pass work?
Well, Juliet, a little bit earlier on today, I was at one of these cafes you can see behind me to see how it works in practice. You have to present either a paper or a digital form of your health pass to be able to get into cafes, bars and restaurants. So what does that mean? You have to fulfill one of the criteria. You have to be double vaccinated, you have to have recently tested negative for COVID-19, or you have recently tested positive for COVID-19 and have proof that you have fully recovered from the disease. If you can satisfy one of those criteria, you can demonstrate that on your health pass with a QR code on paper, or as I did on the government's track and trace app, scanned by a member of staff, validated, and then I was allowed access to one of the cafes to have a cup of coffee. People at the railway stations today in France, at the long-distance bus stations as well, would have been having their COVID-19 health passes checked to make sure they had satisfied one of those criteria before they could board. People going to hospitals for non-urgent operations, to care homes, and also to all bars and restaurants already having their COVID-19 passes checked today. It has actually been enforced since July the 21st. Cinemas, theatres, museums, places of cultural interest, sporting venues as well, like swimming pools and gyms. But MPs and senators had approved, and the Constitutional Council has also approved last week, the entry into force today for the COVID-19 health pass in cafes, bars and restaurants.
It does seem a bit of a palaver to get a flat white, and people haven't seemed that keen, have they? There have been weeks of protests against these COVID passes.
There have 4 straight weekends now that we have seen mass demonstrations, Juliet, across the country. Dozens of small towns and all the major cities as well recording these protests against the imposition of the health pass and against the policy of compulsory vaccinations for health workers. And medical staff have until the 15th of September to get their vaccinations, or they face risk having their pay docked, also perhaps being barred from entry into their place of work if they don't fulfil that recommendation to get the COVID-19 vaccinations. But the government does say that despite the fact that we see 230,000 people demonstrating on Saturday against the health pass, it does also point out, Juliet, that about 230,000 people a day are getting COVID-19 vaccinations. And so we are seeing a real uptake of the vaccination drive. The government wants to counter this 4th wave of coronavirus infections, bringing in measures like the COVID-19 health pass and compulsory vaccinations for frontline workers. So despite those protests, mass numbers are there. The government says there are also mass numbers of people turning up to get their jabs.
Fantastic. Ross Cullen in Paris, thank you.
With the violence escalating in Afghanistan, Pakistan is accelerating work on building a border fence with its neighbour. Daniel Khan reports.
Amid looming uncertainty in Afghanistan due to the withdrawal of foreign troops and the Taliban gaining territory, Pakistan aims to complete the fencing within this year. As border management measure, almost 90% of the 2,670-kilometer border with Afghanistan has been fenced with a view to checking illegal cross-border movement and preventing the militants' infiltration. The Interior Minister says the remaining 10% fencing will be completed in the next 3 months. The fencing began in 2017 following a series of deadly attacks on Pakistani security forces by militants from across the border. Experts say the barrier will also help block smuggling, illegal crossings, and mainly prevent cross-border militant attacks.
We are 100% prepared because of this border management system, and fencing is the major part of this border management system. We have this formidable obstacle placed between both the countries. Had it been the situation 2 decades before, we would not have been that much secure and feeling safe now.
But an influx of refugees into Pakistan seems inevitable. As the Taliban continue to capture key Afghan borders, escalating violence and security concerns, several Afghans are trying to flee into neighboring countries. Pakistan already hosts over 3 million Afghan refugees, and experts say if the situation further deteriorates across the border, this figure will increase massively. Except this time, Islamabad does not appear in favor of opening its border. In case the Afghans seek refuge in Pakistan, the government would not allow them to sneak into cities and would confine them to refugee camps to be established in the Pak-Afghan border areas in an organized manner. The situation in Afghanistan remains volatile as war between the Taliban and Afghan forces intensifies. And as the Taliban try to seize provincial capitals one after the other, the government of Pakistan has given a clear stance on the Afghan peace process that the only good outcome for Afghanistan is an inclusive government. Meanwhile, the armed forces of Pakistan have completely secured the border and stand prepared if a situation of civil war erupts across the border. Daniel Khan, CGTN, Torkham, Pak-Afghan border.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, Hungary for medals. The long jumper in contention for 3 goals at the Paralympics.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there to see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
Murray, what would you say is a good question?
Stephen, I'd say it's one where there's always more than one answer.
The Answers Project is a new podcast series from CGTN Europe. With me, Stephen Cole.
And me, Mari Beveridge. In each episode, we'll take a complex question.
And with the help of some of the world's foremost experts, shine light on some of the answers. So join us for The Answers Project.
Available wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe. The countdown is on for the Paralympic Games, which start on the 24th of August.
More than 4,000 athletes will be taking part, including a 22-year-old Hungarian long jumper and short distance runner, who's a top contender for 3 gold medals. Penelope Leach reports.
Watching Lutza fly through the air, you'd never know she suffered a stroke at 10 years old and needed to use a wheelchair. Just over a decade later, she's achieving her dream of heading to the Paralympics.
I saw para-athletes competing in the 2017 World Championships, and I thought, could I compete? That's when my classification process started.
Growing up in Western Hungary, she was surrounded by sport, with 3 brothers all playing high-level water polo. But there were no disabled athletes for her to look up to. On the eve of her first Paralympics, she wants that to change.
If I can motivate just one person, it's already worth it. I hope we can reach Hungarian para-sports people and disabled sports people, and we can motivate them too. More and more people will join us, and social equality might grow.
As well as being a role model, Lutza's a firm favourite to come home a medalist. She won 2 golds and a silver and set 2 world records at the European Championships in long jump and the 400 metres. Tokyo is the first city to host the Paralympics for a second time. In 1964, there were fewer than 400 athletes. This year, more than 4,000 are expected to compete in a Games like no other. Lutz's coach, himself an Olympian and European champion, believes COVID restrictions will change the competition.
Of course it will have an effect, as we had to wait a year. Whether that's a beneficial thing for athletes or not, we will only find out at the time.
The year-long delay has given Lutzer more time to work on her running. The European Championships the perfect lead-in as she takes her mark on the world stage.
One of my biggest dreams is coming true, being able to participate in the Paralympics in Tokyo. I hope I can hear the Hungarian anthem again. That would make me very happy.
Regardless of whether she comes home with a medal, she's already achieved one dream and hopefully helped some others along the way. Penelope Leash, CGTN, Budapest.
Hold on to your hat and your flag. While the Summer Games have just finished in Tokyo, the 2022 Winter Olympics are less than 6 months away. Our reporter Chun Zuan has the latest on Beijing's preparations.
You might remember this location from its appearance in the 2008 Beijing Summer Olympics. The National Stadium, also known as the Bird's Nest, will once again be the site for the opening and closing ceremony for the 2022 Winter Games. But the location I'm at right now is just one of the 3 zones for the game. Let's check it out.
Venues have been divided into 3 zones: Beijing, Yanqing, and Zhangjiakou. The zones will feature different events throughout the games. For instance, in Beijing, there's the Water Cube.
It gets the name from its look. It was the National Aquatic Center for Swimming, Diving, and Synchronized Swimming in 2008. Now, the Water Cube has been transformed into an ice cube for 2022. It will be used for curling for the Olympics and wheelchair curling for the Paralympics. After the games, it can be used and switched between the two depending on the season. The organizing committee says in late July, all venues and facilities will be ready for testing later in the year.
Yanqing, another zone, is a mountainous suburb of China's capital. Yanqing's Olympic venue will stage the alpine skiing events as well as the sliding events, luge, skeleton, and bobsledding. Venues in Zhangjiakou, which is located northwest of Beijing in Hebei province, will stage the majority of ski and snowboarding events, including freestyle, cross-country, and ski jump. Each zone has its own designated Olympic village, making sure all the participants will have a safe and promising location to rest.
We will continue to fine-tune and make improvements based on epidemic prevention and control policies, and we will deliver all temporary facilities by the end of the year.
Christophe Duby, the International Olympics Committee's executive director, says in early August, spectators could be prohibited from attending events in Beijing. Tickets for the Beijing Games have yet to go on sale, and at the time being, China's borders remain closed to international tourists. While everything is still certainly up in the air, Beijing has raised its restrictions for individuals from medium and high-risk regions from entering the capital amid recent outbreaks. Before the winter excitement comes, make sure to wear your mask and stay safe. Chen Ziyuan, CGTN, Beijing.
The headlines again. Humans are to blame. That's the stark message from the United Nations' most comprehensive report on climate change, which says some changes are already irreversible. Our other headlines: international help arrives in Greece as thousands more people are forced to flee wildfires.
Well, that's it for Global Business Europe. Thanks for watching.
More on all of our stories at europe.cgtn.com, and do follow CGTN Europe on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram.
We're on smart TV apps, Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV. We're on YouTube, Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app.
Coming up next on CGTN, it's Africa Live. We'll see you again tomorrow, same time, same place. From all of the team in London, it's goodbye.
Goodbye.